This is Bill Moberly interviewing Bryan Clark on the 18th of November 2014. Bryan, tell us a little bit about where you were born and your path to the service, how you ended up in the service.
Okay. Well, I was born in Akron, Ohio, and brought up in northern Indiana mostly. And I got concerned about the service when it happened in a Japanese attack. I was at my aunt's at the time for Sunday dinner, and we had the old radio on, and we heard it then. And I had a brother who at that time was just 18, so he was already in the civil or the draft, and he immediately volunteered for service. So I had that connection. My father was a World War I service person, and he drove a truck over in France. That's about all I know that he did. But he was very active in things like VFW, and we were very active at home in learning singing the old songs of World War I. Mom played the piano, and the rest of the family, including my sister, sang all the old songs. And that held me in good stead later on when I went into aviation cadets. I was made song leader officer. As we marched around, we had to sing songs from one class to the next, and so that was my first job, extra job. So I was in. Of course, I wasn't eligible at the time the war broke out, but then when I graduated from high school, I was still 17, and I had already decided that I wanted to take a whack at aviation cadets. So I looked into that, and I signed up for that and was accepted in aviation cadets. Even though you're 17, they could still swear us in, but our service record didn't start until we were 18. And that happened in November of 43. I became 18. And then in January, first part of January of 44, I went into the service, and I went into Biloxi, Mississippi, and that's where a lot of cadets went through there. A lot of people in the Air Corps went through Biloxi, Mississippi. But before we even finished up our basic training, is what we were doing, they decided that they had too many aviation cadets, and they, I think it was something like 35,000 were changed at that time. But they promised us, since we came direct in, that we could stay in the Air Corps. We wouldn't be transferred to another unit of the service. So they gave us a lot of tests, and then had an interview, and we were to select what we wanted to do. If we passed something, then we could select it. And I had passed everything, so they gave me my choice. But didn't I want to really be an aviation mechanic? And that's what I did well in, and they needed them right at that time. So I said, no, I want to be a radio operator gunner. And they stamped it on there. But that a couple of days later, why I got shipped out. As 6 of us, I think, out of the cadets there. that went to a small outfit in Texas. It was the 160th Liaison Commando, and we were to be trainees in mechanics, which was very, very quick, just short orientation type of thing, and then do it yourself. And anybody, if you got stuck on anything, then you ask for help from the old hands. The unit was already going, so it was all filled up when we got there. So we stayed privates the whole time that we were with them. We didn't think too much about that at the time, but I've thought about it since. It didn't seem too fair, but that's the way it was. We had a complete unit. So in Texas, we were at a place called Brownwood, Texas, and it was a CCC camp is what we were in, and it had a pretty good airfield there. And we went through a lot of training, all units of us. We had, for airplanes, we had L5s, Lycoming. They were strictly a two-seater, except the back seat came out, and they could put a litter in there, and so it was designed to lift people on litters out of short fields. So it had a big engine and a lot of lift, big flaps, and so that was our job, was to primarily, it was designed to get in and out of small fields and be able to remove people. But we did a lot of other things, just like carry messages and all that sort of thing. So we trained there in Texas. Then we got shipped to Statesboro, Georgia, another CC camp. And it was just a different environment, a different locale, and different experience for the pilots. We had probably about, there's 24 or 36 pilots, and they're all enlisted men. So they're all sergeants. And the Lycoming was strictly an inline engine, like a Cub, only instead of 4 cylinders, it had 6 cylinders in it. And it was very capable and very trustworthy plane. We didn't have any problems in it. My philosophy in my mechanic work, it's real important, and there's a guy up there floating around, and it needed to be working good all the time. So I took my work very seriously and never had any problems whatsoever. Even as we got overseas and got in the big jungle areas, it became more necessary to think about that. We had the same kind of training there, and moved on to another CC camp in Florida, northern Florida. Now this was getting more like jungles, and had a lot more snakes and stuff like that, so I think that experience was real good, as I remember standing in a line for breakfast. One week we killed 3 rattlesnakes, just standing not in the mess hall, but waiting outside the mess hall. And from there we went to MacDill Field, Florida, which was not too far from there, and that's a big big field. I mean, really big, and that's where we got our clothes issued and so forth. We had woolens and so forth, and we got all khakis, so we knew that was the first hint that we got. We were going to the South Pacific, and then just a couple of weeks there at MacDill Field, we moved onto a railroad, a train, and we were on there for 7 days. And we went all the way to San Francisco there, but it took 7 days with this jockeying around the country. But from then on, we couldn't write home or tell where we were going or when we were leaving and all that. But we left from San Francisco. That was quite an experience. Everybody had to be up on board. It was a large ship. I don't know how many thousands, but there was thousands of guys on that thing. Some of the bunks, some of those bunks went up to 5 stacks of 5, 3 to 5. Mine, unfortunately, was in one of the 5s. And I spent as much time as I could up on the top. But we were going out and going under the Golden Gate Bridge. Everybody had to watch and ooh and ah, and it was very magnificent. There's big swells came, and slowly everybody disappeared. And I looked around, there was just hardly anybody left. And that was the first ordeal we had, and that was everybody thrown up. And that on a troop ship with thousands of guys was a real experience, I tell you.
Was your equipment on the ship with you?
No, we had nothing except we had our own rifles, whatever we were assigned, and I was assigned to carbine, and our backpacks, and that was it. So the equipment, and it wasn't there when we got there where we were going either. It took about a week or 2 weeks before we got our planes over there. And we took the long way around because there was parts of the Middle Pacific that was still not in the U.S. hands, and we had to go around. And so we went around to New Guinea, and we stopped in New Guinea. And we were there for just a couple of days, and we found out that we were on our way to the Philippines, that they had a couple of days before had landed on the Philippines, but we missed the big bunch, which was just as well, because we weren't troops that were going to land on the shore and stuff like that. But we did get up to the Philippines in about 4 days, I think, something like 3 or 4 days. It wasn't a very long trip from there. We'd been on the other ship for 30 days. And so we landed on Leyte. That's the only beaches that they had at that time. And we got off out of cargo nets. They had put cargo nets over the side, and we got off on the cargo nets. And you had to carry your own duffel bag and your own weapon down the cargo net. That wasn't kind of unhandy, and we didn't have any practice on that either. It was do it. And they put smoke down for us. They were having trouble with dive bombers, especially on troop ships, So we were in smoke all the time that we were unloading. And our CO told us, he said, just go to this particular area on the beach and dig foxholes and don't stop till we tell you to. So, boy, we had this, my buddy and I, whoever I was buddied up with, We had us a deluxe one, had roof and all, And we worked all day long on that foxhole, and then they hollered, "Okay, load up. We're moving down the line." So we were going down in a small landing ship, and it was dark when we got on, dark when we got off, and then it raining also. So we were just dumped out and said, "Okay, well, you're on your own." I mean, in other words, you had to make camp for yourself with your shelter half. I slept in a great big truck up in the cab, and it was right nice and dry that night. So I had learned as a Boy Scout. The Boy Scouts training that I had was real good. I was could handle myself, and there was no problem building a fire and all that sort of thing. I knew the camp crafts, and that was a big help. We got some basic training in the Air Force, but it wasn't much. Most of the guys are floundering around, but I didn't have any trouble. Some way or other, I could figure out something that was better. And then let's see, in Leyte, well, we got our own air base. There was no other planes working on it. It's just one they made with bulldozers and rice paddies. And then in a week or two, we got our planes. And then we had to work them all out and get them all set up. And I really don't know what we were doing most of the time, but I mean, seemed busy. They were running dispatches or going someplace else and maybe carrying some injured or something like that. But my main job was keeping the NL5 running, keeping it gassed up, making inspections on it every day, making sure there wasn't any moisture in the magnetos, stuff like that. And that went on for a couple of months, I guess. And during that time, I had some duties. A couple of us did. They sent a couple planes and a couple guys up to where they were sending Corsairs. These are gull wing jobs with great big radial engines. And it was just mostly dogfighting. They were going up to these other island areas, and in dogfights they're just loaded with machine gun ammunition, no bombs. And so we were there for about a week, and then that ceased. They must have cleaned up that area that they were working on. But it was real interesting from the standpoint of it was all Marine pilots. And these Corsairs, when they take off, they're real rough. They really sound like ratchety. And I keep thinking that, this is going to flop, it's going to, crack up. And finally one of them did on the takeoff, and it burned bad. And we ran down there. Of course, we didn't know what we were going to do, but we got down there. But they had crews with asbestos clothing on, and they got the pilot out of the cockpit. I don't know if he looked pretty bad, but they sure did a good job they knew what they were doing.
Now, were you doing maintenance on these Corsairs while you were
No, we were not. All we were doing was keeping our L5s running, and if they needed some parts or somebody to take somebody someplace, we'd do that.
So
we're just running them back and forth.
They were in support of the Corsair mission.
Absolutely, yeah.
Supplies, people, that kind of thing.
Yeah, Right, and if they needed something that it was another airport or something, they'd go get it.
What do you remember about the planes coming back from the missions, either the ones you were maintaining or the ones you...
That's
were
what I
supporting?
remember a lot about, because they weren't supposed to do this, but they all did it. If they had shot something down, they'd do a barrel roll right down on the deck, and that's dangerous. It's really dangerous. But they were so happy, and I remember one guy did two, one right after another, so he got two of them. And that's what I remember when they come back. There was a lot of rejoicing by the individual Marine pilots, and they were doing good. There was quite a few barrel rolls going on. And there was so many different islands in the Philippines, and the Japanese had built airstrips all over them, and pretty good ones. And later on, we used one that I'll mention, and they had dug in pretty good. Well, we went back then to our regular outfit, then our regular duties, and we said, well, we're going to load up. We're going everybody out. So it was a major push into the Luzon, which is the big island in the Philippines, and we would be going to the Lingayen Gulf, which is about halfway up, north of Clark Field, north of Manila, and so forth. And that was a big operation. I mean, really big. That was something to see. And we were on an LST, and that's a pretty good sized ship, but made for shallow water and running right up on the beach, that sort of thing. And one thing that was impressive was when we got there, we had a lot of naval people going along with us, and one of them was a cruiser, and that's a big ship. And there was a mountain up there, and the Japanese had built big cannons back into the mountain, and they'd run them out on the tracks and then take a couple of shots and then run them back in. And that cruiser pounded all day long, trying to knock the rock down over the top of it, and seal it off. Finally, they dive bombed it, and that's what shut it off. But we sat in that harbor for a couple of days with a lot of shooting going on. None of it specifically at us, but some of the strays would get pretty darn close. You could see it coming. And then we got off there and had our own airport, small airport again, and we were out of the way of all of the big stuff that way. And we operated then out of the Lingayen Gulf.
When you were on these bases, on the runways and the airfields, were you in the line of fire from ground troops at all, or? Not where I was. I never saw any. We had some ground fire at night, and that was just people that were nervous and come zipping by. It'd be pretty close, but we weren't fired at per se. Although we would be susceptible to our own fire, that anti-aircraft fire that would burst and then it'd come flying down. That's the closest I got hit. As one time in southern Luzon, there was a big battery pretty close to us, and a couple of Bettys, that's a bomber, Japanese bomber, kept coming over, and they'd be shooting at it, and we'd get in bed, and then we'd have to get out of bed and go in the foxhole, back and forth and back and forth. And I said, I'm not getting in that, I'm just going to sleep it out there. Then all of a sudden, stuff started raining all around us. And just as I got into the foxhole, a piece went right zooming by my ear.
And I dug it out of the bank, and it was a real nasty looking. It was, this real sharp edges, a piece of shell. I mean, the flak, that's what knocks down the airplanes. And that's the closest I come to getting it. It was right there. And I carried that around in my toolbox for quite a while, but I finally lost it someplace.
So you were around Luzon, you're doing support to the aircrafts that are basically supporting all kinds of activities. What kinds of missions were these planes, do you remember the most? I mean, were they rescue missions?
No, I don't think they were. I can't really say because I, wasn't on the other end. But I think most of it was picking up people, picking up orders, maybe picking up maps and stuff like that other people were using, but they kept pretty busy. And of course the roads were terrible, and so this made the L5 pretty useful. One thing that reminded me of watching those guys pull that pilot out in their asbestos suits is I was up in Lingai, and we hadn't been there too long, and I was by myself, and I had some supplies that I had picked up at the big airport, and so I was driving in a Jeep right alongside of the strip, the main strip, and it was pretty busy because they were bombing in Manila. We were probably 100 and some miles north of Manila, and they were bombing Manila, and and somebody told me afterwards that they were bombing in the legislative buildings, and they were having trouble getting to them because they were hiding down in the lower levels, and so they had all these floors on, so they had some kind of a delayed detonation type of thing. So they were penetrating, and well, that was part of the story because as I was driving the Jeep, I looked out there, and there's a bomb going right along and keeping right up with me for just a short time. It was, it looked mighty big, and it was big. And then I looked back a little bit, and then there's this airplane, the bomber. He was in takeoff, and he didn't make it, and the bomb flew out of the racks, and was just centrifugal force. It was ahead of it. So I was right next to the plane, and it stopped, and it dust all over. So I jumped out of the Jeep and ran out to the plane. There was no emergency people there yet. I was there before the emergency people. So there was a couple of truck drivers. They did the same thing, and they were behind me. I really was fast in those days. I was the best person in it. When we took our physical fitness tests, I was the best of all that because I'd been in track and cross country in high school. At any rate, I got to this plane, and it seemed like the dust was still settling around it, and I got to the cockpit, and there was no pilot in it. So I looked the other direction then across and there he was waving, like that. Of course, the first thing you want to do is get out of the way because there's a lot of chance for broken wires and fire, So I turned and ran the other way real fast. So that was the end of my rescue days right there. I tried.
Man. Well, one of the questions I'm interested in with the veterans from St. Matthews is, how did your faith influence your service, and how did your service influence your faith?
Well, I tried when we were in places, I remember Statesboro, Georgia, we didn't have a chaplain. We didn't have any. We could have gone to the local town, but you didn't have any transportation. But we had a chaplain that came to, he got to us last, so it was always about supper time on Sunday evening. And he was available for anybody that wanted to go. Well, out of the 160 guys, there were about 4 or 5 of us that went to church. And if I got anything out of it was that how hard that guy worked and how he stressed the point of how you treat people and treating other people, other people that we're going to run into and overseas and so forth. And I thought that was really excellent training for me. Just too bad that there weren't more people that paid attention to it or didn't take advantage of it. Treating people was one of the best, one of the things that I thought was important for my job over there. For example, in Leyte, no, it wasn't Leyte, it was in Luzon. We got settled down. There was this young family that lived right alongside of this strip there, and the man wanted to work all the time if he could, and if we'd hire him for little jobs. He dug our well that we used to make so we could take showers with and so forth, and he was down in that hole digging away in that. And I tried to give him some of the things that I had that they might eat, and they had a little girl, was 3 years old, Alfreda Manungdo, I remember that, and they taught her to say that in English, and she was real proud, and she'd tell me her name is Alfreda Manungdo. Well, I got on I was supposed to take a bunch of guys down to Manila, on some leave, short leave, and they assigned me the truck driver. I don't know why, but I had never had much experience or any experience driving trucks except in a little bit in the service. But anyways, I drove all the way down, all the way back. But I bought some silk material, red, real bright red silk, and gave it to the Manungdos. And it wasn't a couple of days, and that little girl showed up with that real bright red dress on and so forth. And they just kept, it was embarrassing, they just kept bringing me things, cooked chicken, and they couldn't afford stuff like that. Oh, another thing, he had pains in his stomach and complained about that a lot. And so I asked our medic, I said, could you take a look at this guy and see if you could help him? And he did, He had parasites, and he got him the necessary pills and cleared that up. I did get a letter from him after I left that they had my address when I had moved on, and I did get one letter from him, and it was very touching. And there were other people. When we were down in southern Luzon, we were attached to the 157th Regimental Combat Team for about 5 months, so that's quite a period to be away from your own outfit. But anyway, we had a good airstrip, a good base, being a Japanese air base. And there's a little kid that kept showing up he had a good idea. Was we didn't have much traffic going in and out other than our planes. But he found that if somebody came in there in a C-47 or something like that, he could sell them bananas. That the strip was not in town and or other, but boy, anybody come off ship or something, they'd buy any bananas the kid had. So he was always there, 7 days a week. And of course his bananas got ripe and fell off the stem and all that, and I'd buy them, and also I took care of them. And what somebody said, if you're going to keep that kid around here, and it's about 10 years old, said you're going to have to cut his hair. So I did. I cut his hair, and I gave him rations, and I bought his bananas that were falling off the stem and so forth. And one day, and there were some ladies caught onto this too. They'd come out to sell us chickens and bananas and papayas, and they were talking to him in Tagalog, and so I couldn't really follow the discussion. And they're talking to the little boy, and they had asked him who his father was, and he pointed to me and said, "He is." And that really got me. And it was just, I didn't really feel that I was taking care of him or anything, but I was looking after him. And he knew it. And another time, we had, for guards at night, we had Filipino guerrillas, and they were pretty good. There were guerrillas, and then there were guerrillas there. Some of them were pretty good, some of them weren't, but these young guys were good, and we didn't have any problems with our planes at night. Nobody sabotaged or anything like that. And one day they'd been working hard about some project they were on, and so I said, "Let's go swimming, over." And then one of them said, yeah, he knew a place, a spring that was good enough we could swim in. And so we took off our shirts and just swam in our shorts. And when he did, I found he had a hole that started here, and they merged right under his arm, and it was, really pretty nasty looking. And it had healed, and I said, "What happened?" He said, "Well, he got shot by Japanese, and they were making a raid." And the guy must have been shooting right at his heart, but I said, "Well, how did you get over that?" And he said he couldn't go home, because if he'd go home with a wound on him, they'd kill him and his family. And said he put leaves, some kind of leaves, on that wound. And that's the kind of things that I ran into. The people really suffered a lot, and that we did a good job of going in there and relieving of that.
Well, those are very, very powerful and memorable stories. Is there anything else that, when you reflect back on your service, that immediately comes to mind, like the most memorable thing that you recall?
Yeah. We were down in southern Luzon, Legazpi. That's where that was attached to the 157th Regimental Combat Team. And we had 3 or 4 L5s there, and the same number of mechanics and pilots. And it was late in the afternoon. And that field was a good field, but didn't have any lights on it, of course. And a couple of officers came from the people we were supposed to be helping down there, the 157th Regimental Combat Team, and said that we got a problem. There's some people that are trapped on a ridge up about 40 miles up into the jungles. And we can't get to them today. And they're running out of ammunition. It would be possible to drop some ammunition on them. And of course, we didn't have nothing left. He said, "Could you just throw it out of the plane?" He said, "Yeah, we could try." And he said, "Well, we need a pilot, and they need somebody to throw it out of the plane." And so my favorite pilot, Ed, said he would do it. And I said, "Well, okay, I'll throw it out." And we had to take the door off of the back seat. It was a long door for putting litters in, and then take the seat out, and then there was just a flat plywood thing. So that was it, and we put in 6 boxes of M1 ammunition. And I tied myself with a piece of rope. It's the only thing I knew to keep. I don't know what I'd do if I'd fall out on that rope, because we were probably doing about 120, and over. So at any rate, we had no trouble finding them. They had pretty good maps, and besides that, when we flew over them the first time, they were just cardboard all over, and they were lining their foxholes with cardboard that they used for the sea rations and stuff, And so we knew right where every one of them was. I could see them all down there. So we'd go over, we went over 6 times, and each time we'd drop 1 box. And they said, "You've got to put it right in the foxholes." And that's about what we did. I saw some of it hitting and banging and splitting open, but they got the ammunition. And they survived. And while we were up there, and I thought, are they going to be taking shots at us? They may have been, because I'd see little red flashes going up every now and then, but not one hit us. And they may have been told not to shoot the Japanese. They just would give away their positions.
So how long were you in the theater of combat?
About a year. A month or two was, maybe two, yeah. The war was over when we were down and attached to this, when I was down and attached to the 157th. So they brought us back, and my next assignment was to go up north, and it was a little problem. They were trying to get the planes up to Japan and then to Korea, and they were going to fly them up. And that was the theory. Well, that theory worked, but the first half they got them up there okay, but then the second half they were having bad trouble. You have the rainy season and all of that. You don't take off in those little planes with a lot of rain, and I was in. They sent me to Okinawa on a LST, and we had some parts in that. We were waiting at Okinawa. They were going to fly from the Philippines to the Okinawa to Japan. Well, that first flight was 11 hours. 11 hours with those L5s. And they didn't have enough to give gas for that, so they put belly tanks in the back seat, strapped them in there on the frames, and then ran that extra gas through the engines, and that's how they got to Okinawa, and then more gas then up to Japan. They also had these big flying boats. They had one of those going along, did the navigating. Just for the navigation, all we had was a little auto compass sitting up there. And they got one batch of them all the way up there, and all the way, then one up to Japan, and they were having trouble getting the rest of them there. Quite a few of them, like 12. So they sent me back to the Philippines. Sent me back to the northern tip of the Philippines. There was again another Japanese strip there, and that's where they were sitting waiting. And they had some hotshot that was going to get us up there, and he said, one time he had us lined up, and I had my tools all on a C-47, and we were going to go to Formosa and then over to Okinawa. But still, here they all came back after they had left. But I'd gotten on that 47 already. I thought, well, I'm going to get to see Formosa. But I didn't. And then they scratched the whole thing. It was, the pilots got, the more they thought about it, the worse it got. And it was a very dangerous thing to do. But they did get part of them up there. And then eventually I went on back to Okinawa and then up to Japan, and at Fukuoka, after a couple of weeks in Japan, and I went over to Korea, and I spent the rest of the time that I had to go home.
Now, what do you remember about going home?
Well, that was a very delightful thing. And what I really remember when we got back we took the northern route, so it was really rocky. But when we got into in California, they had a steak dinner. No matter what time of day it was, and everybody got a steak dinner, and it was really wonderful. Oh, and the first thing was some ladies, the Red Cross, I think, or Salvation Army, come with pitchers of milk and gave us big glasses of milk, and that was really great.
When was that? What time frame did you come back?
January of 46. And that was a couple of months after the cessation of the...
One last question. As you know, it's almost 70 years since you were over there on some of those islands. What do you reflect back on your service? What did your service mean to you?
Well, it meant helping people. I felt like we really did a good job of helping the people in the Philippines. And of course we were helping ourselves too, because we had a lot of assets there and had suffered a lot. A lot of people had suffered. So I thought that this was something we had really done, and really done right, but it was at a terrible expense. I flew over Hiroshima, going back to Japan, and it just, it really brings up the question about, did we have to really do that? Well, we did just as bad a job in Germany, in the towns that we just smashed up, and Tokyo firebombing was just as, killed as many and more people as they did in Hiroshima, but the Hiroshima was one bomb dropped, and I thought, what a terrible, terrible thing we're doing. But that terrible, terrible thing probably saved me. If they were going to keep me with that 157th, then they were going to be a decoy or something like that. That was the scuttlebutt. But I felt that we had done a really good job. And then for coming back, what did I think about coming back? I had it all planned out what I was going to do, and when we landed in California, in less than a week, I was sitting in class in a GI Bill. And so I went to, it was at Indiana University, it was an extension. And that's why I started there, because it was handy and I'd just come home and I did. But I worked in the summer, and I worked in a foundry, and that I went to Purdue. I found out that scholarship was something that was probably my thing. I was in the upper 1% of the graduating class at Purdue. And then I got a master's at Missouri, and then I got a doctorate in Southern Illinois. And so I figured I got paid back, but that was my opportunity. A lot of people didn't take that opportunity. And I could do it.
You did. Well, very good. Well, thank you very much for the time, and I know this is a tough thing to think back on sometimes.
Yeah, I wrestled around for a couple of days, and I didn't remember anything, there was, but I have other stories I didn't tell you about, but it all came back.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you doing this for us.